Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from the Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast, Australia, Professor Selena Bartlett. Selena, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Bartlett is a group leader of addiction and obesity at the Translational Research Institute, the Institute of Health and Biomedical Innovation, and a professor in clinical studies at the Queensland University of Technology. She's a widely published author and commentator on addiction, obesity, and smashing the mindset. So before we talk addiction and obesity, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what inspired you to get interested in addiction and obesity.
So my journey, and I'm a pharmacist by training, and in 1989, my sister got a mental illness and she was put into a lockup ward and given an overdose of drugs. And I didn't like how she was treated. So I stopped being a pharmacist and I started becoming a neuroscientist.
Wow.
So I went back, I did my PhD in neuropharmacology. Then I did my postdoctoral training at the Australian National University in developmental neurobiology. Then I took my family to San Francisco and ran a research lab there for 12 years where I was developing drugs, working with companies and at the University of California, San Francisco. And then I got recruited back to Australia. And that's how I became a group leader. But my whole lab switched into neuroplasticity, meaning the brain's a massive ability to change with training and effort, and our understanding that the brain is more like a muscle than we give it credit for. And that's my new work. And it's really called Thriving Minds. So I've moved out into, and my podcast is called Thriving Minds. My work's called Thriving Minds. And I work in a research lab too, where we're mapping all the changes. So the thing that drives me every day and why I still do it and why I travel the world and did all that training and continue to retrain myself is because driven by my sister, who ended up taking her life in 2006 from her illness, because of our lack of understanding of the brain and how we treat people as a consequence. And I know it can be different. And so my whole new world and life is dedicated to changing that conversation.
Wow. And, you did talk about the brain being a muscle. And I remember speaking to someone else where they actually said we can train our brain quite a lot. But I wanted to ask you, can you explain how addiction and obesity are related?
So why did I end up studying addiction and obesity is because they're the only ways that you can actually study the brain right now, because the models to study other illnesses are not available. Whereas if you look at alcohol addiction or nicotine addiction or other drug addictions, you can actually add drugs to a system and study what's happening and changing inside the brain. And that's how I came to do that. So my whole work in America was on alcohol addiction and showing the changes in the brain. And then our lab demonstrated that the nicotine cessation drug, which I'm not sure what it's called in other parts of the world, but it's called Chantix and Champix in Australia and America. Our lab was the one that showed that could reduce drinking. Then we went on to do clinical trials. Okay. So during that process, we were doing some experiments and we were using sugar as a control in the experiments. We end up showing that sugar, too much sugar, this is added sugar, which is in every soft drink and everything that people are drinking now, changes the neural pathways in the brain in exactly the same way that alcohol and nicotine do.
Wow. Okay.
And that leads to people overeating. And it's the way people medicate their stress. And so that changed my lab. We also went on to show that too much sugar outside causing diabetes and heart disease and so many other chronic illnesses changes the physical structure of the brain. And no one ever talks about that. So everything I do is related to how the brain's involvement in all of these things.
How interesting. And what would you say are some of the primary factors that contribute to addiction and obesity?
We now know the cause. The primary factors are early childhood experiences that aren't good over many generations. So the addiction, in terms of a simple word, 1 minute, is medication for stress and trauma. But we always focus on the alcohol and the smoking and the drugs, but we don't focus on the cause. And so that's another thing that's changing, is our understanding of what drives these things in the first place. And that's called ACEs. ACEs mean adverse childhood experiences and how they impact the brain's architecture that lead to addiction and obesity later in life. And also depression, anxiety, and many other things that we focus on.
So for my viewers and listeners, Selena, can you give me one or two examples of the early childhood experiences, or ACEs?
Yes, well, it's very well known. There's thousands of papers. And the founders of this field are Andrew and Fletty. They worked at the CDC in the US and Kaiser Permanente in California. And there's a list of 10 of them, and you can go online and find out all about them. And just Google ACE, adverse childhood experience, and there's a list of 10 of them that you can check off, a 1 or a 0, and you get a score. Wow. And they showed that score out of 10 is highly correlated with you going on to get certain types of alcohol addiction, smoking, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, incarceration, not being able to finish school. Life outcomes are completely dictated by that number. And that's a game changer for my field, because in terms of mental illness and mental health disorders, we always focus on the disorder and the pathology, but not the underlying causes. And this is a societal thing, and we never want to focus on the cause. We always just want to fix the person's problem.
Correct. Well said.
So
sorry, you go ahead.
That's okay.
Okay. I was just going to ask you that, how do socioeconomic factors such as income and education impact addiction and obesity? I mean, we just seem to have this mindset that if you are from an economically weaker section, there is a possibility that you may be more prone to addiction.
There's not a possibility. It's absolutely well known. Scientifically well known, thousands of papers published, and it's every society in every country in the world. So being born into poverty and lack of opportunity and education, it just completely makes sense, right? Your brain needs nutrition and education to be healthy.
Correct.
It's as simple as that. So if you don't think that that's a problem, then that's the society's problem, in my view. And if we don't change that, then the society will never thrive.
Wow. And what role does genetics play in addiction? I mean, people say that, this is a very, very strong connection between genetics and addiction and obesity.
Absolutely. And it's not just that. So it's the genetics plus the environment combination. So you could be born with, and most people know this, they can look back on their grandfather, father, mother, grandmother, aunties, uncles, and tell you the whole line of people that used to be addicted to alcohol or have diabetes or whatever. So that you can see the strong genetics. But there is also other members of the family that have the same background history that don't go on to get obesity or alcohol addiction. So that's the question to really focus on. Why is that? And the key outcome and knowledge that we now know is that it's all driven by the parenting, caretaking relationship, where some people get buffered and protected more than others within one family, for example.
Wow. And what about the modern environment and lifestyle? How is this contributing to the rise in obesity and addiction?
That's very obvious, isn't it? So there's three. I'd label three main factors: the loss of our tribal community, and social connections. We're all becoming very individual. That's a really big factor, massive factor. The second thing is sedentary lifestyle. So people are sitting more, they're more on their phones. That's a big one, right? Being on the phone a lot means that you're not moving, but also you're getting more stressed out. And what did we say? Addiction is medication for stress. So that's a big one. And then diet. So the diet in the last number of decades has become laden with sugar and high salt and processed food. And any country that has that in lots and lots and large quantities leads to those things happening later. Because sugar's addictive, salt's addictive, processed food, ultra processed food really impacts the body. So you can see immediately that we're not using many factors in our society more to drive people's healthy habits. It's really hard to stay healthy because you're up against everything, because everyone's eating a lot, drinking, really large soft drinks. We used to have really small ones. People aren't out running around playing in the trees or being with their friends, sitting and eating together like we used to. There's so many factors there that just add up really fast to drive it.
Correct. And based on all the work that you're doing, did you see an increase in addiction and obesity during the pandemic?
Well, that's been studied too and shown. There was a 25% increase in especially in adolescents or young adults between the ages of 19 and 25, which, I mean, just obvious, isn't it? Why?
Wow. The next question to you, that what role does mental health play in addiction and obesity, and how should treatment plans address these psychological aspects?
So I don't believe that there's a psychological aspect. I believe it's a brain aspect. Everything impacts the way the brain's wired, which leads to all these behaviors that we only focus on the behavior. So what I'm interested in doing is shifting away from those conversations towards brain health and fitness to show everyone has a brain. And if you don't look after it, then it starts playing up, whether it's cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety, addiction, obesity. There's a million labels now. There's about 400 different criteria that you can be labeled with. And yes, it's got its aspect and help for people. But ultimately, tell me anyone you know that's taking their brain to the gym every day and telling you what they're doing. Tell me someone in your circle, and you're a very well-connected person, interviewing lots and lots of people around the world. How many of them are describing to you, hey, guess what? I went to the gym this morning, did 5 reps, looking out the window, and God, I feel so much better for that.
I agree. But though I'm not sure if you would agree, but there are a lot of what they call brain exercises, which are really to stimulate.
Well, but when people think about that, they think about crosswords and Sudoku and brain exercises on computers and writing and stuff like that. No one ever thinks about taking a panoramic view, looking out the window in the morning as soon as you wake up, and knowing that you've immediately turned down the physiology in your stress system. We spend a lot of time thinking about meditation and all these cognitive processes to make people calm down. We don't teach people the really simple stuff because people like really complicated things and people want to think it's really hard. But we now know that the brain is 40% untapped in its potential, and most people aren't tapping into it because they've never been shown how to. And the reason why it's so hard for some people more than others is because of what I just talked about, is early life experience, adverse childhood experiences. These things really keep people stuck. And to get out of that takes a lot of work.
Amazing. And what would you say, Selena, some of the most effective strategies for preventing and treating addiction and obesity?
The first thing is training your brain like a muscle. Without anything else. And in terms of really severe addiction, obesity, this is a completely different story. So when you're talking about people that are really addicted on the street, or their whole life is in dysfunction, that's a completely different question. In that situation, that's at the extreme end.
Mm.
that person will need assistance for detoxification, full-on mental health services, and all of those things. When I'm talking about what I'm talking about prevention. Because if you're at the state where you're getting a diagnosis, that means it's like treating someone that's had 5 heart attacks.
Right.
And we want to reduce that. We want to take that right back and show people that we can educate people. We can do things differently. We don't need to wait until someone has these big diagnoses, which are really hard to then look after. So that's why I talk about brain health and fitness, meaning everyone has a brain. And when everyone starts to see that they're not training their brain, why should someone else go and do something that they won't do themselves?
Correct.
For example.
Correct. Well said. My next question is that how can we as society support individuals who are struggling with addiction and obesity?
That is a brilliant question. That's such a brilliant question because it's so important that we look at this at the community society level and not on the individual.
Correct.
And that shift is the biggest shift we can take to really change the direction that our societies are going in. So an amazing filmmaker, Shannon Swan, is about to put out a film called The Great Separation. And it's about a young man who nearly took his life but got rescued, and now he's got one leg. And he goes on a journey to retrain his brain so that will never happen to him again. And the center of that story is all about losing connection. And so what he's been doing in his home, in his block of apartments, and in his community where he lives in Australia, is start talking to people and starting to rebuild back that community and that feeling of connection. And this documentary film shows this. And I think it's such a great example of what we could do together to rebuild our connections again. Because I can tell you now, when you think about birds flying together, right, they fly together in big flocks. But if there's one out on its own, it's going to be eaten.
Correct.
And that's exactly what you're asking. How do we bring those single people back into the flock to protect them, which is what we used to do over many, many centuries ago in different ways. And some communities still have it, don't get me wrong, because they're really thriving communities. You know, they've been talked about a lot in the blue zones and all sorts of different books written on this subject. But what do we do right now, if you're listening to this, to go and help somebody, go and help someone pull them back into your flock? You can see that they're isolating. You can see, but you're afraid to say something. Don't be afraid. They're more afraid than you are. And they don't have the capacity to reach out. I can tell you a million stories of people that save people just by making that phone call. Just by sending that text, just by going around and knocking on the door, you can save someone's life and totally improve their mental health just by those connections. That's how powerful connection is. It can't be understated, the power of this connection. And I'm sure you've felt it too by running this podcast, or I'm sure you're getting more thrill out of this than any business you've ever built in your life.
Absolutely. You're so right. And, pulling your flock together is a very, very powerful statement
Metaphor.
you made. And, I think it's very, very powerful. I agree with you. My next question to you is that based on all the work that you have been doing, what are some of the most effective treatments and interventions for addiction and obesity?
So if you don't mind me stepping back from that question and saying that, because you've got all these leaders and people trying to succeed in their life listening to your podcast. The best thing you can do is your morning routine for your mental health. And I call it brain health, because the number one thing that can make the biggest difference is starting to think of your brain like a muscle. Because at the moment we think of it as a problem. So when we start to now change the conversation where we think brain health is everybody's business, not somebody else's problem. because in the mental health game, you either have something wrong or you don't. Well, that's completely wrong. That is just completely wrong, because that's just trying to make yourself feel good that, oh, I'm good, but they're not good. That's just not true, because everyone has something.
Correct.
And the brain is on a spectrum, and every brain is completely different. We like to bucket each other into depression, anxiety, or whatever, and that's just wrong. It's not true. And so in terms of someone listening to me right now, so in the morning, as soon as you wake up, as soon as you open your eyes and you're in bed, don't reach for your phone. Immediately use your eyes and look out the window and take a wide panoramic view. And what you're doing is you're using your eyes and the visual neural circuit in your brain and turning down the stress system, which is driven top down to the amygdala. And if you think of that as training your brain like a muscle, and do it every day until it's an automatic habit and you're not thinking about having to do it, you've basically shown the plasticity of your brain and how it can be changed. And you're also setting up your brain for the rest of the day for something good. Now, if you forget to do it in the morning, it doesn't matter. Now go and do it during the day. When you're at work and if you're in a little office somewhere dark, just take your eyes outside and take in a really wide view. And this wide view has been well studied. And this is the work of Andrew Huberman's lab. He's a famous neuroscientist at Stanford, and many other people. And I find that if you can't do this one thing, don't try and change your life.
Wow.
And this is the thing about understanding the brain like a muscle. Why it takes so much effort, why there's so many self-help books, why no one's making any difference in their life. And even though they're reading everything, they're doing everything, is because they don't think of this as a muscle that needs to be changed first before it can engage in counseling or reading or all of these other things. Unless the brain's in a good space, it's not going to pay attention or learn or remember. So that's all I challenge you with, is that one thing. And if you can't keep that up for 2 days, let alone a week or a month or 6 months, then you cannot expect that your life's going to change.
Amazing. How interesting. I'm going to start this first thing tomorrow morning. And my last question to you, based on what got you really started when you shared with your sister's case, as you look ahead, what are your hopes and goals for addiction and obesity? And how do you see the field evolving in the coming years?
My hope is that people have thriving minds, and that then they will make the change right now as adults that they don't think they can make, because the brain can change your whole life, so that you can help the next generation and the next generation, so we don't keep repeating the cycles of the past where we keep labeling people with mental illness when it's not right. When we need to start fixing the causes, which is societal and in the community. We need to reach out to, I would hope by the time I pass, that I've left this message in a way that's really, it's starting to take effect, because I've been doing this since 1989 and delivering this message of training your brain like a muscle since 2013. Wow. So it wasn't only the pandemic that allowed people like you to interview me and other people and not be afraid to think, oh, I'm mental health, that's terrible. Whereas brain health, everyone needs a brain. And if you don't want cognitive impairment, if you don't want Alzheimer's, if you don't want all these things, each person on this planet deserves an opportunity to be happy, healthy, and strong. By understanding the brain is not rocket science, and you can train it like a muscle.
Wow. And on that note, Selena, thank you so much for speaking to me. Your comment, train your brain like a muscle, which is such a powerful statement and which so few people know. And I'm hoping all our viewers and listeners are listening to what Professor Bartlett has said, not once, but a few times in our conversation today. Treat your brain like a muscle and train it. And the second thing, which is so powerful, which I promised I'm going to start from tomorrow morning, is when I wake up, no looking at the phone, go out and look at nature, take it in and do it every morning. Because
and you don't need to get up out of bed. You can go to the window. So make it as simple as possible.
As simple as possible, but start to change the way your brain is perceiving nature, perceiving your life, rather than keep getting bogged down with my new email, my new WhatsApp, and who's called me last night. Thank you for talking to me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for talking to me with such length about your own personal story, which is so powerful. Thank you for sharing it with me. Thank you for talking to me about so many different aspects of addiction, obesity, and mental health. Thank you
You're
again,
welcome.
and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.